5 ruthless outlaws rode confidently toward a frail old widow's home, believing they had found an easy victim. What they didn't know was that beneath her gentle appearance lurked Red Martha Holden, the legendary outlaw queen feared across the entire territory. When the moment came, Martha transformed in an instant, moving faster than any of them could react, her seemingly harmless needle becoming a blade pressed against the throat of their leader. Now cornered, the outlaws must confront a woman whose cunning and experience far exceed their own. What fate awaits these brothers who thought themselves invincible? Will they survive, or have they sealed their own doom by underestimating the wrong woman? To discover how this thrilling confrontation unfolds, listen to the full story and find out the surprising ending. If you love captivating tales filled with suspense, courage, and legendary characters, subscribe to our channel right now. Your subscription supports us in bringing you many more extraordinary stories. The sun glared mercilessly above the dusty main road winding through Serenity Creek, an isolated settlement in the vast Wyoming territory. On the porch of a modest homestead at the very edge of town, an elderly woman sat in the heat, stitching patterns into a worn quilt with careful, deliberate movements. Her name was Martha Graywood, and she looked every bit a fragile widow living out her remaining days in peaceful solitude. Her hair, a soft cloud of silvery strands, had been gathered into a loose bun at the back of her head. She wore a faded green dress that bore signs of many years' wear, yet was meticulously laundered and pressed. From a distance, few would guess that Martha's frail figure and gentle demeanor concealed the heart of Red Martha Holden, once the most feared outlaw leader in the Wyoming territory, a figure whose very name made seasoned lawmen hesitant to draw their weapons. She had vanished after the infamous Shadow Gulch shootout of 1882, presumed dead by most who followed the story. But here she was, alive and unassuming, silently watching as 4 approaching riders kicked up clouds of dust on their slow ride toward her homestead. Martha paused her sewing and peered at these newcomers. Their arrival was unexpected. Visits were rare in Serenity Creek. She set aside her quilt, letting the battered sewing needle rest in her gnarled fingers. Fingers that once gripped revolvers and rifles with lethal expertise. Even her needle, to an observant eye, was held at a subtle angle suggesting it could become a makeshift weapon at the slightest provocation. The man at the head of the group halted his horse, a dark bay coated in road dust. He swung a leg over and dismounted with the casual confidence of someone sure of his own power. A ragged scar marked his face from temple to jawline. Lifting his wide-brimmed hat, he offered a mocking show of courtesy. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said. "Name's Garrett Holcomb. My associates and I have been riding hard since daybreak. We saw your place. Figured we'd ask if our horses could take water from your pump. Maybe rest ourselves in the shade a while." Martha inclined her head as if grappling with the movement. "Of course," she replied softly, in a voice that wavered with age. "The pump is around the side by the barn. There's a trough for the horses as well. Please help yourselves." Her demeanor showed nothing but the unruffled caution of an old widow. There was no trace of the commander's authority or the biting wit that once made men tremble. But her gaze flicked across the 4 riders as she noted their appearances and body language with a practiced eye, cataloging details much like she used to when scouting banks and stage lines. One rider, a lean man with tightly pressed lips and watchful eyes, was Wyatt Holcomb, Garrett's brother. Another, broad-shouldered with a quick, darting stare, went by Dirk, though no family resemblance showed in his features. The last man, a rangy fellow who held the reins of his horse loosely, was Boyd, the group's muscle. That left the youngest, Eddie, standing off to one side. Eddie's restless fidgeting and sidelong glances marked him as the least experienced member of this operation. Unnoticed by the visitors, a second woman watched the newcomers from behind parted curtains. Lucille Barnes, 27 years old, stood quietly with a loaded Winchester rifle in easy reach, her pulse quick but her expression steady. Most of Serenity Creek believed Lucille was Martha Graywood's widowed niece, come from a larger town to assist her aging aunt on the property. In truth, Lucille had discovered that Martha was no ordinary widow. She had learned hints of Martha's true past after living here barely a month. A hidden panel beneath the floorboards of Martha's bedroom revealed old newspaper clippings describing the escapades of Red Martha Holden, a name spoken with dread across the frontier. There were wanted posters, too, edges curled and yellowed with time, but still bearing legible bounties. And most telling of all, Lucille had seen Martha spring into lightning action when a drifter attempted to rob the homestead during the previous spring's cattle drive. The so-called frail widow had subdued the armed thief with shocking agility, leaving him limping away in fear and pain, never guessing the old woman would move as swiftly as a panther. That event had changed their relationship forever. Lucille could have packed her things, decided the risk of living under the same roof as a legendary outlaw was too high. Instead, she had stayed, intrigued by this woman who had carved a life out of nothing in a hostile world. Martha, in turn, had shared enough of her past for Lucille to understand that not all outlaws lived and breathed senseless violence. Lucille began learning practical self-defense, discovering in Martha an unyielding mentor. Today, as these new arrivals eyed the property with predatory interest, Lucille stood ready in the shadows, waiting for the moment they had rehearsed countless times. A heavy oak armoire against the interior wall offered cover from stray bullets, while still granting a clear shot at the front door. Outside, Martha continued her flawless performance, a frail widow offering a polite smile to the strangers. "I can make you lemonade if you like," Martha offered. "It's a scorcher. Wouldn't want anyone collapsing from the heat." Garrett's gray-blue eyes flicked from the barn to the house and back, all while maintaining that veneer of polite conversation. "Mighty neighborly of you," he said, strolling onto the porch after his men had led their mounts around to the trough. "Mrs. Graywood, is it?" Martha gave a slow nod, resting a hand on her lower back as though it pained her. "Martha Graywood," she confirmed. "My late husband, Clyde, built this place years ago after the war. God rest his soul. It's been my home ever since." Behind her performance lay a carefully woven identity, the name, the timeline that had her arriving in Serenity Creek decades after Red Martha Holden had supposedly died in 1882, and all the details that helped maintain the harmless widow narrative. She stepped forward to open the door, calling over her shoulder. "Lucille, dear, we have visitors. Might you put some coffee on the stove as well?" Lucille appeared, wearing a simple gray dress, her brown hair pulled back in a tight braid. She gave a small nod to the men, avoiding Garrett's direct gaze. "Yes, Aunt Martha," she said, then quietly slipped from sight. As Lucille started preparing coffee inside, two of Garrett's men, Dirk and Boyd, wandered into the barn under the pretense of fetching water. The barn was sturdier than most frontier structures, with a layout that allowed multiple vantage points. Thick beams supported the loft, and the walls had been designed with cunning subtlety. Someone with the right knowledge might notice hidden hinges and compartments. Dirk's hand fell to his holster as he examined these features. "This barn's been reinforced," he muttered to Boyd, who stood near a thick back wall. "Take a look at this. Hardly any gaps between these boards. It's not for weather alone." Boyd nodded, his eyes narrowing as he ran his palm over a set of nearly invisible hinges. "This back wall is more than a wall. Some kind of hidden door, maybe." A sense of disquiet grew between them. The place was far too secure for a feeble widow, yet they pressed on, unaware of the magnitude of the trap they had stumbled into. While Dirk and Boyd scouted the barn, Garrett and Wyatt settled at the kitchen table inside the house, facing Martha. The tension was palpable, though Martha continued to present herself as a fragile hostess. She placed mugs before them, moving slowly and deliberately, as though her joints ached with every step. "Thank you, ma'am," Wyatt said, forcing a politeness that did not reach his eyes. He studied each corner of the kitchen, each doorway, as if expecting trouble. Martha rested in a rocking chair near a tall cupboard, her hands folded over her faded skirts. "So," she began gently, "where do you young men hail from? I don't see many travelers these days." Garrett smiled thinly. "We've been all around. Montana, Nebraska, up and down the territory." The conversation stalled as everyone listened to the near silence outside. No birds sang in the oppressive midday heat. No neighborly voices drifted on the wind. Serenity Creek was aptly named, an isolation that had long suited Martha's need for privacy. Suddenly, gunfire shattered the stillness, two sharp cracks in quick succession. Wyatt lurched to his feet, hand dropping to his revolver. Eddie, the man who'd been standing guard on the porch, lunged toward the door, half drawing his sidearm. Everything seemed to freeze, each person reacting in a fraction of a heartbeat. Martha did not appear startled. In fact, she seemed almost expectant, as a faint, humorless smile curved her lips. "I'd hoped we could avoid violence," she remarked calmly, "but you men never did know how to read the signs." Garrett whipped his revolver from its holster. Before he could fully level it, Martha moved with impossible swiftness. Impossible for anyone, let alone a woman who must have been in her 60s. In her hand glinted a narrow blade with a thin handle disguised as a sewing needle. She'd had it concealed along her forearm, ready for the moment he drew. Quicker than a rattlesnake's strike, she pressed that blade near Garrett's throat. Wyatt, who had been rising, froze with one hand on the wooden box that sat on the mantelpiece, one of Martha's few ornaments. He stared, stunned, at the sudden reversal. His fingers tightened on the box reflexively. In response, Lucille stepped from behind the armoire, Winchester trained on him. "I wouldn't do that," Lucille said quietly, her voice calm. "Drop the box and move away. I've been taught to aim center mass, and I rarely miss." Garrett's knuckles whitened around his gun, but he recognized the futility. Martha's blade hadn't so much as quivered at his throat. Another inch, and the scarred man would be tasting his own blood. Outside, Eddie hesitated, unsure whether to investigate the barn or assist in the house. Before he could decide, the door flew open, revealing Lucille's rifle leveled at him. Martha's voice rang out in cold command. "Drop it, son, or you won't live to see another sunset." Garrett's breath came faster, mind reeling at the revelation of Martha's hidden lethality. Then a memory flared, an old wanted poster of a woman with piercing eyes, rumored to have more cunning than a dozen criminals combined. It named her Red Martha Holden, leader of an unparalleled gang during the days when the territory was raw and unsettled. She'd robbed stage lines, banks, even government payrolls. There had been talk she died in a cavalry ambush at Shadow Gulch in 1882. "You?" he whispered, voice hoarse. "You're her, Red Martha Holden. But that can't be. You've been dead for 17 years. Martha's lips twitched in a cold smile that found no warmth in her eyes. "Dead to the world, perhaps, not to myself." With the men under her blade and Lucille's rifle, the confrontation ended as abruptly as it began. Within moments, Eddie, Wyatt, and Garrett were forced to relinquish their guns and stand at gunpoint. The shots from the barn had signaled that Dirk and Boyd had fallen prey to Martha's carefully laid defenses. Lucille retrieved rope from a chest in the hallway, and she and Martha proceeded to tie the three men to chairs in the parlor. They ensured wrists were bound firmly behind them, ankles tethered to the sturdy chair legs. The wide-eyed fear on Eddie's face spoke volumes. Wyatt's features twisted in frustrated anger, while Garrett's expression settled into guarded calculation. He was the type who assessed every nuance, searching for a pathway back to control. "All right, gentlemen," Martha said once the men were secured. "We'll wait for your other friends to join us. Let's see if they're still alive out there." Lucille cautiously headed for the barn, rifle in hand. She moved with the quiet efficiency Martha had taught her. Inside the dim structure, she found Dirk kneeling near the back wall, wincing from a shallow graze on his arm. One of Martha's ingenious traps had been triggered, a hidden mechanism that released a weighted beam. Dirk was pinned beneath it, his gun lying uselessly beyond reach. On the far side, Boyd lay unconscious, a dark bruise on his temple. Judging by the rising and falling of his chest, he was alive, though certainly worse for wear. Lucille kept the rifle aimed steadily. "Either of you want to test your luck trying to move?" she asked, voice clipped. Dirk raised his free hand in surrender. "No argument from me," he muttered. "Seems we misjudged the place." She ordered him to roll onto his stomach so she could secure his wrists. She then proceeded to check on Boyd. He slowly came to, blinking in confusion. One glance at the rifle trained on him was enough to keep him docile. "All right," Lucille said. "Let's take a walk inside." She marched them both toward the house, occasionally checking over her shoulder. The morning sun was scorching now, reflecting off puddles left by a brief overnight shower. It cast odd illusions in the rising heat haze, but none that would help these outlaws escape. When Lucille entered the house with Dirk and Boyd, all bound and bruised, Martha's lips tightened in satisfaction. She gave a small nod to Lucille, an unspoken acknowledgement that the plan they had rehearsed in bits and pieces for months had been executed flawlessly. As ropes were fetched to tie Dirk and Boyd, Martha addressed Garrett. "So, 5 of you, after all. Are you truly all kin?" Garrett's expression flickered. "Holcomb brothers, by blood and by choice," he said, voice tight. "Garrett, Wyatt, Eddie, Dirk, Boyd. We've ridden together for years." "Huh," Martha murmured. "I expected 4, but your little band is bigger than rumors indicated. Regardless, you won't be leaving here without a clearer understanding between us." Wyatt spat on the floor, earning a disapproving glance from Lucille. "What does that mean, old lady? Gonna kill us in our sleep?" Martha regarded him calmly. "Don't tempt me. However, life's taught me that dead bodies breed more trouble than living souls who know when to stay quiet. It all depends on how well you can behave." They moved the conversation to the kitchen, where the men remained bound in chairs around the table. Martha allowed Lucille to offer them water. They drank greedily, the day's heat and their wounds making every swallow a relief. Garrett cleared his throat, mind still racing. "You clearly know who we are," he began. "We're not novices, been operating in the territory for years, but never did we expect to come up against Red Martha Holden." "That name hasn't been spoken around these parts in nearly 2 decades, Martha replied, sitting at the head of the table. "I worked hard to bury it. You shouldn't have gone digging." Dirk, holding a cloth to his bleeding arm, grimaced. 40,000 in stolen gold doesn't stay buried forever," he said. Martha's gaze shifted, her lips forming a thin line. "So that's what you're after? The fabled payroll from the Great Northern Freight Company back in 1880? Garrett nodded. "We followed rumors that a handful of those double eagles kept showing up in Serenity Creek, coins from that big haul. We wanted a piece of it before the law clamps down on freelance operators like us. Figured an old widow living better than she should might be a lead." A silence fell. Outside, the relentless sun continued its climb toward midday, casting short, hard shadows across the dusty yard. Martha rocked gently in her seat, the old chair creaking. "You found me, sure enough. But in doing so, you've put your own necks in a noose. If I hand you to Sheriff Milton when he returns from Fort Casper, I'll have to explain how I managed to capture 5 grown men. Or I could leave you out by the creek in shallow graves where no one's likely to turn over the earth." Eddie, the youngest, swallowed. Ma'am, we don't want more trouble. We made a mistake. That's all." "A mistake," she repeated, her tone devoid of sympathy. "What you did was come hunting for gold that was never yours and planning to rob a woman you assumed weak. The difference between you and me? I never targeted people just trying to eke out a living. I took from railroads, banks that cheated honest families, officials who lined their pockets on the backs of others. Whether you believe that or not, it's the code I live by." Time wore on. Martha gave Lucille a subtle nod, and they loosened the ropes on each man's wrist just enough to restore circulation. Garrett and Wyatt massaged their arms, as did Boyd, Dirk, and Eddie, though they remained effectively immobilized. "You talk like you were some sort of vigilante," Wyatt said, "but your wanted posters made you out to be a demon in a woman's guise. You stole thousands, terrorized entire stage lines." Martha's face hardened. "Tales grow in the telling. We rarely resorted to violence. The dime novels embellished my reputation." She paused, letting the words sink in. "That doesn't mean I claim innocence. Only that the story was never as simple as this printed." Lucille returned from the adjoining room, carrying a shallow basin of water and a few towels. She quietly began to clean the gash on Dirk's arm, her movements showing surprising gentleness despite the hostility that had preceded this moment. Garrett, eyes narrowed, looked at Martha. "If you despise killing, why do you have all these traps and plans set up around your place?" "Because men like you eventually come around," she replied simply. I was never naive enough to believe I could disappear without consequences. So I built my defenses, stashed away supplies. I taught Lucille what she needed to know. For 17 years, no one came asking questions. Until now. As night fell, the air cooled, but the tension in the house remained stifling. Martha allowed Lucille to prepare a simple meal: beans, cornbread, and coffee. Even the captives needed sustenance to keep up their strength. The Holcomb gang ate warily, hands still bound, gazes darting around, anticipating any chance of escape. Martha let them finish before addressing the room. "Morning will bring choices," she said, her voice calm. "But I have no intention of letting you wander around my house all night, scheming." "Lucille!" Lucille fetched a small vial from a kitchen shelf. Dabbing a cloth, she approached Eddie first. His eyes widened in alarm as she pressed it over his mouth and nose. "Don't fight," she murmured. "It'll be easier." In seconds, Eddie's eyelids drooped and his head slumped forward. Wyatt and Boyd tensed in alarm, but the ropes held them fast. They had no way to stop Lucille from doing the same to them. Dirk tried to turn his face away, but Lucille caught his hair and pressed the damp cloth firmly. He followed Eddie into oblivion a heartbeat later. When she reached Garrett, he locked eyes with Martha. "You plan on us living to see the dawn, ma'am?" he asked, voice edged with irony. Martha gave a slight nod. "I do, provided we talk like civilized people. Come daybreak, we'll see where our roads lead." Her words were the last thing Garrett heard as Lucille's cloth descended, sweet-scented fumes swirling him toward unconsciousness. The house grew silent except for the rhythmic creak of Martha's rocking chair. Lucille stood by the window, rifle resting at her side, watching the last of the twilight fade. Outside, a whisper of wind rustled the grass, carrying the scent of damp earth from the earlier rain. "I'll watch them for a couple of hours," Lucille said softly. "You need rest, Martha." Woodham, Martha gave a slight shake of her head, but eventually relented. "All right, dear. Wake me if you see any sign they're stirring." She rose stiffly, bone-deep weariness showing in her stance. After Lucille returned to her vigilant post, Martha went to her small parlor. There, beneath a threadbare rug, she lifted a loose floorboard and drew out a wooden box inlaid with mother of pearl. The key to its lock hung on a chain around her neck. With the lid open, she spread out its contents on the low table: a series of old clippings from newspapers, a stack of weathered wanted posters, a tarnished watch with an inscription she once held dear, and a small leather-bound journal. She opened the journal at random, scanning the neat lines of her own handwriting, entries from 1880 detailing a freight robbery. A younger Martha, hardened by loss but not yet disillusioned with the entire world, had meticulously planned every detail. She closed her eyes. It felt like a lifetime ago, and indeed it was. The carefully constructed persona of Martha Graywood had lived far longer than Red Martha Holden ever did. She thought of Lucille, of the young woman's quiet determination and bright curiosity. Lucille deserved to carve out her own path, just as Martha once had, without old enemies coming to tear it all down. By dawn, the night's chill had faded, leaving a soft golden light washing over Serenity Creek. In the kitchen, 5 outlaws began to stir. Eddie moaned as he opened his eyes, confused as to why he couldn't move his arms. Garrett, Wyatt, Dirk, and Boyd each jerked awake with varying degrees of alarm, recalling where they were and what had happened. Martha stood at the stove boiling coffee. She turned to regard them. "Good morning. I assume you'd like something to drink." The men said nothing at first, each assessing the situation. Garrett's gaze flicked to the front door, the windows, the rifle leaning within Martha's easy reach, and of course Lucille, who hovered at the corner with another firearm in hand. "Mrs. Graywood," Garrett began in a quiet tone, "I propose we talk." "That's a fine idea," Martha said. "Lucille, let's see if we can make them comfortable enough to chat." They loosened the ropes at the men's wrists, allowing enough slack for them to grip a mug. No one made a rash move. Garrett sipped the coffee, mindful that the slightest aggression would probably earn him a bullet. "You wanted the gold," Martha said plainly. "You believed it might still be hidden here. that an old woman might be storing it in her cellar. And now you know Red Martha Holden is very much alive. Wyatt, the one with more polished speech, inclined his head. Rumor is you took nearly 50,000 in gold coin from that train job. Town gossip said occasionally, a rare double eagle shows up in Serenity Creek. We followed the whispers. I see, Martha replied, her voice level. Let me clarify one point for you. I no longer have that gold. Most of it was redistributed over the years. I kept enough for my needs, but never stayed flush with double eagles. Too risky if folks got suspicious. Dirk's brow furrowed. Why hand it out if you went to all the trouble stealing it? A faint, humorless smile crossed her face. Because I never planned to be an outlaw forever. My original motive wasn't to hoard money, but to undermine corrupt railways and banks that preyed on settlers. I took what they wouldn't willingly return, and if I could help a widow keep her farm or aid a storekeeper struggling with railroad fees, so be it. Garrett studied her, equal parts disbelief and reluctant admiration. You were a legend for a reason. Yes, legends are often misread, Martha said, but let's stay focused on today. I have a homestead to protect. You have your lives, both are worth something to each of us. Eddie looked from one brother to the next. We're outnumbered, outgunned. Even if we overpowered her, the traps, the defenses, there's no clean escape. Wyatt rolled his eyes at his younger brother, but had no immediate rebuttal. Martha set her coffee on the table. I've been thinking about how this ends. You five come from different backgrounds, that's clear enough. You have varied temperaments, different tastes for violence or negotiation. So I see 5 possible paths. She paused, letting the concept sink in. Garrett frowned. 5? We ride together. There's only one path that ends with us all leaving. Is there? Martha tilted her head. I commend your loyalty, but unity in crime is not always unity in destiny. What I mean is, each of you faces individual choices. A flicker of dismay crossed Dirk's face. You're not trying to turn us against each other, are you? I don't need to do that, Martha replied. But the truth is that not all of you seem equally set in this life. Eddie, for instance, doesn't strike me as a hardened killer. Neither does Wyatt, though he tries to cover it with a gambler's charm. Boyd? Now there's a man who likes to solve problems with fists. Dirk is your tracker, your observer. And Garrett, you have the mind of a tactician. You'd be a formidable adversary in any era. Her assessment, delivered so matter-of-factly, hung in the warm morning air. The men shifted in their chairs, discomfited by the accuracy of her observations. Lucille said nothing, but her watchful stance indicated she agreed with every word. Let's not pretend we can chat all morning, Martha said. Sheriff Milton will be back in 2 days. I could hand you over to him, but that means risking questions about how I subdued you and possibly exposing my true identity. Boyd grimaced. So bury us in the hills then? That's what you're getting at? Martha's expression showed neither outrage nor pity. It's a possibility, but it's not my preference. Dead men have a way of cropping up unexpectedly. Also, I've no great desire to spill needless blood. The Holcomb men said nothing, each contemplating the possibility of a bullet in the back of the head. Finally, Garrett sighed. What's your proposal then, if you have one? Oi, Martha exchanged a look with Lucille, who nodded slightly. I offer you a pact, Martha said. You will leave Serenity Creek. You will claim that rumors of the gold were false. You'll keep Red Martha Holden's story out of your lips. In return, I will let you walk away with enough coin, legally earned by me over the years from livestock and orchard sales, to pay for fresh horses and provisions. A chance to start elsewhere. If you try to harm me or Lucille on your way out, well, my traps and bullets speak for themselves. She let the final statement hang like a noose. The 5 men stared at one another, weighing how to respond. Dirk coughed. You're telling us we get no slice of that big fortune we believe was hidden? That's correct, Martha said. It doesn't exist here as you imagine. The portion I once possessed has dwindled or been scattered. Pursuing it any further would only waste your time, and likely end your lives. Garrett's eyes flicked around the group, then settled on Martha. If we take your offer, how do we know you won't track us later and finish us off once we've ridden away? She lifted a brow. When have I ever been known to chase people who meant me no further harm? I only acted when threatened. Wyatt rubbed at the rope marks on his wrists. It's not that we don't appreciate the mercy. But how do we explain to others that we got bested by a woman twice our age and her niece? You don't, Lucille said, stepping forward with an edge in her voice. You keep your mouths shut and move on, or you face consequences. It's that simple. It took another hour of tense discussion before the deal was sealed. The Holcomb gang had no viable alternative. They agreed to write out under oath not to return or speak of Red Martha Holden's resurrection. Martha, for her part, offered to keep them alive and even see that they were provisioned well enough to reach the next town. Together, she and Lucille systematically cut the ropes securing each man. They did it one at a time, ensuring no sudden betrayal. Under Martha's watchful eye and Lucille's ready rifle, the 5 men shuffled outside to collect their horses. Dirk and Boyd, bruised from their misadventures in the barn, moved gingerly. Garrett still carried himself with a remnant of pride, though he made no threatening gestures. Lucille handed Wyatt a small pouch. There's a handful of silver and a few bills from the local bank, enough to get fresh horses if you need them, or lodging. No reason to camp by the roadside tonight. Wyatt pursed his lips, deciding not to question the generosity that accompanied their humiliation. Eddie looked miserable, his gaze drifting from Martha to Lucille with something like regret in his eyes. Martha noted the way the young outlaw avoided eye contact, as if ashamed of what they had done. The mid-morning sun beat down as the Holcomb brothers mounted up. They paused in the yard, horses sidling restlessly. Garrett glanced back at Martha, who stood calmly on the porch, arms folded. A revolver rested against her hip, a fitting accessory for the woman who had once been the territory's most notorious robber. You're letting us live, Garrett said. Some might consider that a mistake. We could come back with more men. Martha's silence was heavy. Then she spoke in a quiet, commanding tone. It would end badly for you. I have the advantage here. Familiar ground, hidden defenses. Men who test me usually don't live long, as you've seen. But I believe you're more sensible than that. Now go. It's a long ride to anywhere from these parts. For a heartbeat, Garrett weighed his pride against the raw truth of her warning. Then he nodded curtly, turned his horse, and guided it down the trail. The other 4 followed. None spoke. They disappeared into the shimmering haze of the dusty road, the rising heat swallowing their silhouettes one by one. When at last the riders were out of sight, Martha exhaled slowly. Lucille came to stand beside her, the Winchester still in her hands. The older woman spoke first. They may keep quiet. Pride's a powerful motivator. Admitting they got outplayed by an old widow won't add luster to their reputation. Lucille nodded, her posture relaxing only now that the threat was gone. Do you trust them not to seek revenge? Martha's lips pressed into a thin line. I don't trust them in the sense of giving them my back, but they won't return to Serenity Creek soon. They'll want to save face. If they brag of crossing me, they'll have to explain how they got these bruises. It's far easier to claim they found no gold or that their source was mistaken. Lucille considered the point. Still, we should be extra cautious the next few weeks. Martha patted the younger woman's shoulder. We will be. We always have been. They walked toward the barn. Broken beams and disturbed hay bore witness to the scuffle that had taken place earlier. With a sigh, Lucille began checking the trap mechanism to reset it. Martha lent what assistance she could. The older woman's movements were slower, heavier now that the immediate crisis had passed. Every joint seemed to ache from tension. By midday, the barn was back in working order, the yard swept of footprints and any stray items that might raise questions. They paused on the porch to share a simple lunch. The ephemeral dust devils danced across the road, and a gentle breeze cut the worst of the heat. Lucille gazed across the valley. Do you think that's the last time we'll have to do this? She asked softly. Martha didn't answer right away. She reached for her battered old quilt on the rocking chair, the one she had been mending when the Holcomb brothers first arrived. Her gaze wandered the horizon, a view she'd cherished in her quieter moments, the wide fields and the gentle hills. This homestead was more than a refuge. It was the life she had built step by step after discarding her infamous persona. I can't say, Martha said at length. The world changes and memories fade. But as long as those old stories about Red Martha Holden persist, there's a chance someone will come searching for gold or vengeance. We'll stay ready. Lucille studied her mentor's profile, illuminated by the midday sun. In Martha's lined face, she saw both weariness and a fierce spark that had never died. Here was a woman who had once orchestrated the greatest robberies in the Wyoming Territory, who had outwitted marshals, railroad tycoons, and rival outlaws alike, and yet had chosen a quiet life, if only the past would leave her to it. "Whatever comes, I'm with you," Lucille said. "You can count on that." Martha looked at her niece in name, a fondness creeping into her expression. "I know, and for that, I'm grateful." She settled into the rocking chair, needle in hand. Before drawing the first stitch, she paused and reached over to squeeze Lucille's fingers, a rare gesture of warmth and acknowledgement. Then Martha picked up the quilt and resumed mending as though it were just another day on the frontier. High above them, the sun shone across the untamed landscape, lighting the dusty road, the patch barn, and the hidden traps. Life here was never easy, but for the moment, the threat had passed. Lucille took one last look at the horizon, then turned to go inside, already thinking about the chores and the lessons Martha would have her practice before supper. Martha rocked gently, letting the needle weave in and out of fabric. The breeze rustled her silver hair. If passers-by happened along, they would see only an old widow tending her quilt, a frail woman living out her final years in the shadow of nowhere. Few would guess the quiet power she held, or the cunning mind that had just seen off a band of outlaws. Fewer still would suspect the truth. Red Martha Holden yet lived, her legend dimmed but not extinguished, ready to protect her sanctuary with all the cunning and fire she once wielded on the open range. Eventually, she set the quilt aside and looked out across the valley, her eyes lingering on the road where the Holcomb brothers had disappeared. A sardonic smile touched her lips as she thought of them riding into the distance, carrying secrets they dared not whisper. That was the way of the frontier, she reflected, an unspoken pact between predator and prey, survival dictating strange alliances and unexpected mercies. With a last glance at the brilliant blue sky, Martha rose, carefully gathering her sewing kit. She would store it inside, perhaps check on the orchard she'd planted years ago to keep her table and her neighbors supplied with apples. Life was a precarious balance here, but it was hers, and for now that was enough. She disappeared through the doorway, leaving the midday sun to bleach the porch boards. The rocking chair swayed gently in her wake, its slow rhythm a testament to the dual truths of her existence. An outward facade of gentle widowhood, and the enduring spirit of the most formidable outlaw the territory had ever known. In the end, Martha Graywood, once known as Red Martha Holden, showed mercy instead of vengeance. The fierce showdown at Serenity Creek taught everyone involved that true strength is measured not only by power, but by wisdom and compassion. The Holcomb brothers, given a rare second chance, learned a vital lesson in humility and respect. Martha herself reaffirmed that courage is about protecting what you cherish most. Sometimes life presents unexpected opportunities to rewrite our destiny, and everyone deserves the chance to choose a better path. What are your thoughts on Martha's decision? Do you think the brothers deserved the mercy she showed? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your opinions and discuss this remarkable tale further. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for even more incredible stories.